Okay, so I'm back. Hopefully that was a fun video to watch, and it shows you that a lot of attention needs to be paid to the policies that companies use when you call them and how they try to authenticate you. And we're also going to do a lecture on policies themselves, and so that will be another thing that we'll talk. We'll circle back to this idea a little bit later. But for now, I'm just going to tell you one last story. Okay, so this story concerns somebody that was in prison. Okay, and so they were in prison, and there was actually software that was used to manage. Like there's a database where it's like, okay, here's the prisoner's name, here's their ID, here's when they get out of prison. And so all of that is just recorded in a database. If you're able to breach that database, then you're able to change the release date. And, there's a chance that like no one, everyone goes by that information, right? Nobody remembers firsthand what things are supposed to be. And so it might be able to do it. You might be able to actually get someone out of prison by just changing a database. Okay. And so the attacker wanted to do this. And so their idea was to get malware onto one of the on the network that controlled this prisoner database. Okay, so what they did is they did what we call domain spoofing. Okay, so there was a website that is used by like employees of the prison system, and it looks like this. It's like ewashtinol.org. I forget what the website does. You can actually try and click on it and see. Looks like it maybe no longer exists, but anyways, okay. So this is the real website that these people used a lot. Okay, and what the attacker did is they registered a domain that looks very, very similar. Okay, so the only difference is that instead of a W here, there's two V's. Now, in the particular font on the slide, right, that looks quite different than a W, right? But depending on the font of a browser or the email client that's displaying a link, having a W as opposed to having two V's could actually look similar. And certainly if you weren't looking very closely and you were just sort of skimming it, it looks kind of correct. Okay, so we sometimes call this domain squatting because you sort of sit on a domain that's similar to another existing domain. Okay, so again, it's not like all the details are spelt out, but there was a news article about this, and so we know that there was some sort of phone call. Okay, and the adversary, the social engineer, used the pretext of working for IT within it. I believe that somehow they said, "Oh, I sent you an email. Can you click on it or whatever?" But somehow they got them to visit this site instead of this particular site. And then there was an exploit on the website that they were able to do, maybe because they were using an old browser version or something like that. Again, the details aren't in the article, but they were able to get malware on the computer. Okay, so the social engineering attack is calling up, pretending to be IT, getting the person with the computer that's going to get infected to visit a URL that looks a lot like a URL they would normally visit, but is actually different. Okay, so once they got malware on the network, they were able to sort of move around from computer to computer. They were able to get login credentials. They were stored in a file, I guess, or something like that. And they were then able to break into the software that had the prisoner database, and they changed the release date for one prisoner so that prisoner would be released earlier. Now, in this particular case, it was spotted. And so, and then there was an investigation, and they actually caught the person who had hacked in, and they faced criminal charges, if I recall correctly. But anyway, so this was another social engineering attack. Okay, so what are the kind of high level principles that we can think about and kind of walk away from this lecture with? So the first thing is we saw a kind of weakest link principle where if, like, for example, in the @Matt story, Amazon was the weak link, right? They had an error in their policy, and because of that error in that one policy, the adversary was able to take over Gmail, Twitter, Apple, a whole bunch of accounts. Okay, so the adversary is always going to. It just takes one of these companies to have some weird policy, and then the adversary might be able to break down the whole entire system. Okay, if you think about how would you protect against this? Say you're Amazon, how would have you caught this error before? And so there aren't good methodologies. This is a methodologies class. And so we're studying this actually not because there's a good methodology, we're studying it because there's not a good methodology. So you can think a bit about it, but it's obvious that it's going to be pretty hard to analyze and protect against because it's very specific. Like sometimes it's like policies on the phone. Sometimes it's like, well, how do you know who you're talking to? How do you make sure that your humans aren't tricked by other people? It's not like a technical thing where you can throw some cryptography at the problem, for example, right? It seems like sort of difficult to deal with, but despite that, corporations are trying to deal with it, and so there's a lot of education about these kinds of attacks. There's training. So we do training at Concordia as faculty. It's not directly on social engineering, but phishing and those kinds of things, which are a piece of social engineering, they're covered in these training sessions. And then going over the policies and just trying to find those loopholes and see if you can spot them. And then, of course, if someone exploits it, then being able to quickly respond and fix it is also important. Okay. Another general thing that you can do is instead of having one person screen access, you can try and split that responsibility up amongst multiple people. So for example, let's say there's a signing key, you could split it up so that any 7 of 10 people can sign information, that type of thing. So now you have to compromise multiple people, not just a single person. You can go out and hire a security firm and they'll come and they'll try and do social engineering attacks against your company, and then they'll write you a nice report about what worked and what didn't work and what you could improve. And then you can also question how much do you rely on things like email addresses, domain names. Those are particularly vulnerable because they can be reset. SIM numbers we'll come back to in a few lectures when we talk about policies, but that's another thing that can often get reset with the phone number, and it can be actually quite damaging. Okay, so that's it for the lecture, and yeah, thanks, and I'll see you when I see you in class next.